For many viewers, one of the most pervasive and influential pieces of media out there is SpongeBob SquarePants. As a 20-year-old franchise, its incredible presence in media has become stronger than ever. As the abundance of merchandising opportunities the sponge has taken on grows, so does the ire it draws from those who recognize its persistence. Despite bumps in the road here and there, the main series is critically lauded to this day. Part of why this stems from these adventures of nautical nonsense being known to be thought as thought-provoking as it is entertaining. No matter how the story is established, the themes and mythos of the SpongeBob universe continue to delight audiences with tales from Bikini Bottom and beyond. One of the most persistent themes presented in SpongeBob lore is perseverance. Consistently, the characters presented overcome and deal with their conflicts by facing them head-on until the job is done, which is consistent with how the series is marketed. As one of the most successful animated franchises today, its wealth of manufactured products and experiences are also pushed into public consciousness concurrent with this main theme. While the production turnover rate is relatively high, so is the amount of cynicism regarding the franchise as a whole. As the series is built on characters compelling for their agency and honesty, the vast ocean of SpongeBob merchandise has been enough to arouse skepticism and erode some goodwill for the brand's mission for some time now. The SpongeBob mythos and how it's presented can be a bit of a mixed bag, thus putting up many fans up in arms about the fluidity of the franchise. This makes it all the more poignant that one of the most soulful and reflective pieces of SpongeBob iconography was presented and thought to be one of the most polarizing uses of its wide periphery structure, that being the Broadway musical, outfitted to be bold and brash with all that extra flash. Upon announcement, the advent of the show was received with mostly tepid curiosity. Fans of the series and animation fans alike seem to think that this was another unnecessary adaptation to add to the pile, while Broadway buffs kinda exuded horrified salt that the idea of this dumb cartoon being put on stage in the Great White Way. To be clear, there have been dozens of comics and cartoons that have seen full-length Broadway adaptations, not even counting the recent Disney adaptations. There are far more smaller adaptive shows in smaller venues all around the world, too. Some, like Annie, are regarded as perennial classics, and others, like Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, still live in infamy. But despite that, the idea of SpongeBob, in particular, tackling the main stage was grossly undesirable to many, including its director. When introduced to this concept, she swiftly declined the offer. After a brief period of researching the property, she made a turnaround and signed on to it. She cites the captivating nature of the universe as her reason for persisting with the project. Much of the material referenced in this decision and the further character studies come from SpongeBob's earliest seasons. With regard to the series' lore proper, many acknowledge the 2004 theatrical movie as the prospective centerpiece of the story's continuity. The main plot involves the titular character far and wide to fetch a royal crown. The story at heart about searching for and accepting oneself. Set up as downtrodden and uncertain about his future, SpongeBob leaves on his journey, unassured of his place in the world and the validity of his abilities as a member of his ecosystem. Being criticized mainly for his childlike nature and energetic optimism, he's left in a vulnerable emotional place while trying to defend his home and his livelihood from a similarly vulnerable position of being obliterated. The story's natural conclusion comes from him learning not only to accept, but embrace himself without reservation, and he's promptly rewarded at the end of the story for this. Drafted to originally be the series finale, the show progresses for better or for worse. The musical was initially conceived during this period of growing pains sometime after this in the late 2000s, the peak of post-movie SpongeBob financially and the glut of its infamy critically. Often the derailment of the show and the characters would be cited as a point of contention among many, for as many criticisms thrown around, a pattern was established involving the abandonment of the movie's superlative development. Learning to embrace oneself while also growing as another was not only seen as a relevant lesson for the movie, but as one to be carried over into the series proper. Many future episodes would be panned for their irreverence and delusion of the characters previously mastered in such an undertaking. Viewers were left disappointed or angry in Spongebob later on because the general appeal of the world felt forgotten and got caught up in a case of mistaken identity, whether because some singular character traits were blown up and exaggerated to oblivion or because they were seemingly abandoned for something else entirely. For as much as they tried to raise the stakes and up the ante, it seemed like nothing that the crew would do would go on to match the Sponge of yesteryear. Around the time Steve Hillenburg came back in a more hands-on approach, the fandom slowly but surely began to warm up to the newer seasons as a newer but familiar characterization was implemented back into the show. The series would continue to print money for Nickelodeon, but the return to an authentic storytelling style was welcomed more and more with open arms, with the reception of the second theatrical film Fish Out of Water reaching or even surpassing the original's acclaim. It became more and more cemented that the cartoon could again be appreciated in a similar light to its glory days. This is the environment in which SpongeBob the Broadway musical was brought into. As established previously, this venture was not embraced with the same enthusiastic zeal as the new batches of episodes, but at its core lies the same potent messages that propelled it to cult status. Don't get me wrong, this show is excellent overall. The casting's spot on, the choreography's electrifying, the costume design's extraordinary, and that soundtrack will always slap. Believe me. But the heart of the show lies in its deep identification with SpongeBob as a theme. Harkening back to the love of one's inner self as a plot is transparent, but the love of everything SpongeBob related inside and out is transcendent. The interpretation of the Sponge philosophy introduced live on stage does a masterful job of identifying not only the main protagonist, but most of the main set of characters to set such a theme through their own complex and nuanced conflicts. Perseverance, self-confidence, exploration, and curiosity are espoused forthright and are main tenets of resolution. To me, the spirit of the story as a whole, which was originally manifest through the SpongeBob movie, has been essentially reincarnated into the successful Broadway adaptation that made waves in the media cycle for months. Many on opposite sides of the love-it-hate-it spectrum could take a liking to the yellow superstar on stage and resonate with the core of the character, the core of the franchise, the spiritual epicenter of this character. Aside from the general pushback many in the animator and viewer communities have and continue to push back against the idea of its existence, those who have and will continue to miss out on such a unique experience in fandom. There's something that just can't be said about it despite it being so notable. To the thousands that have seen it, including myself in its Broadway debut, and to the thousands that'll see it on tour in the upcoming months, perhaps we'll be able to reflect on what may soon become SpongeBob's best day ever.
I like square butts and I cannot lie. Squid and sea star can't deny. When a sponge walks in, 4 corners in his pants like he got phone book implants, the crowd shouts. All the ladies stare. Dang, those pants are square. Swinging through the seaweed tangles is a butt with sharp right angles. Now SpongeBob, I wanna get with ya.